I think when things are going well, like you might be like, oh, thank you, God, and I know you're there, but it's not like you're down on your knees necessarily, like really pleading and asking. And so I think that sometimes it's those most dire moments that really that figuratively bring you to your knees and literally bring you to your knees that really strengthen that relationship with God.
We all have those moments where we need a little encouragement to get through our day. Someone to remind us that we are not alone. Find peace. Embrace joy. Seek God daily.
Welcome to Jesus Calling, Stories of Faith. Our guest for this episode is Emmy Award-winning journalist and author Linsey Davis. Linsey is a correspondent for ABC News and has done stories for World News, Good Morning America, and Nightline. Falling in love with storytelling at an early age, Linsey tried her hand at public speaking for the first time in church. Her faith in God has been key to her compassionate style of reporting and her desire to spread a message of hope to a world where the news isn't always good.
My name is Linsey Davis. I'm a correspondent for ABC News, a mom, a wife, and a book author. Both of my parents started out actually as school teachers. My dad taught math and my mom taught English, and my dad went on to open his own construction company. And my mom has subsequently retired as an English teacher, but she's the person that kind of made sure that I know, the difference between when you say done, like her common phrase is like turkeys get done and people get finished. And so there's the person that was like always making sure that I, get lay versus lie, right? But I would say that she's also very much responsible for my kind of falling in love with storytelling and with writing and the English language. My mom has always been a big writer and spent a lot of time in our house, writing and kind of modeling that for me. And certainly, like, she loves to tell the story. Now she's like introducing me to something that I got mad at her, she says, when I was a certain age. And I said, why didn't you tell me that these letters made words? Because I was so anxious to be able to read and write. And that was something that I think that she very much cultivated. Growing up, I can remember being a toddler and getting a few quarters and putting it in a little dolly purse that I had and going off to Sunday school and, giving my donation and being very involved in, the children's choir and all the same things that I'm trying to impart on my son now, who's 5. They called it the YPD, it was the Young People's Division at church when I grew up. And so those, on the 4th Sunday, that was the Children's Sunday. And so we did everything on Sunday except for preach. So we did the affirmation of faith and welcome of visitors and pass the plates for the offering. And when I look back now, I think that was so important to, who I am today. It was my first time, ever doing any kind of public speaking was in church. I think that confidence building that goes on at that point, that is what I'm looking at as far as what I feel was part of the building blocks of success, if you will. It was all, the foundation was in the church. And again, now I'm looking at making sure that I get that foundation for my son. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. Sometimes I still wonder. But I started out thinking I was going to be a psychologist. Then I wanted to be a lawyer. Then I would start kind of like weighing the pros and cons of doing each of these jobs for like a long one. For as far as being a lawyer, I'm a very competitive person, and I thought that the idea of winning and losing, because if you're actually a trial lawyer, which is what I thought I wanted to do, what might be really taxing for somebody like me who really is very competitive, and the idea I was going to have a career that I was going to, not that, and of course in every career you kind of have wins and losses, but it's not so clear that you did not get this, the defendant or whatever cleared. So I think it's more defined as a lawyer. Psychology, I ended up majoring in psychology in undergrad, and I think that still has very much like the base of what I do now. I have an interest in people and hearing their stories and talking to them about it. in a way that still kind of is relevant to what I do as a journalist. I studied abroad for a semester in London, and it was the first time I'd already fulfilled my core curriculum classes, and so it was the first time in my college career that I was able to just take any class that I wanted. So I took a lot of like writing and British literature, and happened to be in Spain with my Spanish exchange student from high school, and I was watching the news in her house in Spanish, and my Spanish is not very good, so I can't say that I understood anything that they were saying, but in that moment I said, that's what I want to do. And I will say, I guess it's a blessing or a curse, but I'm the kind of person who I really focus in on something and really don't let it go. So for whatever reason, I decided in their living room in Sevilla, Spain that day that that's what I want to do. Then I just started looking at what do I need? What are the steps that I need to take in order to do that? I didn't know anybody who was in the business. I didn't have, I knew someone who, it was indirectly like a family friend who owned some TV stations, and that's how I ended up getting my first job as basically it was like a glorified intern, and really didn't know quite what I was getting myself into, didn't know the longevity that, I might have. But figured I just graduated from, at that point I had a master's degree in broadcast journalism, mass communication, and figured I ought to give it a try, pursuing a job in what I had majored in. But I really didn't know what the trajectory would be or where I was gonna end up, but it just felt like this might be a good fit for me, we'll see. The hardest story ever to report, and I've been a journalist now for more than 20 years, was the earthquake in Haiti. It was the first time that I had actually smelled death. And it sounds like, I think like a cliche I would read about in a novel, but there is definitely a smell to death. And especially when you have corpses that are still just exposed in the street and nobody is tending to those bodies for several days at a time. And I remember in particular doing one interview with a lady who, only spoke French, and we had a translator, but, the words actually needed no translation, her feeling and sentiment. She said, the translation in English was, and I don't even remember my question to her, but she said, "I am my family now." And that was it. Everybody that she knew of had died. All of her friends and all of her family, and she didn't have a house. She didn't have anything. Her church had been destroyed, and it was just a moment of really, it was the first time that I actually covered a story. Normally I cover a lot of disaster, unfortunately, and death and mayhem, and I just go back to my regular life and don't skip a beat, really. Because I think there is kind of a separation, of my putting my reporter hat on and then going home and being a mom. Often it's an easy transition between the two, and this one was not. I mean, this one I really got back home and thought about all the things that we take for granted, that, this woman and many others like her, hundreds if not thousands like her, were now in the same predicament of starting from scratch. And now not even starting from scratch in the way of physical buildings and our material comforts, but that she didn't have any family or any friends and a job. I mean, and so that was a really hard story. And we were there for, I was there maybe 10 days. So it was a lot. And we were living in the same, we had creature comforts, especially compared to, we didn't have electricity, and maybe we could get a shower every other day or something like that. But it was kind of like camping for us, really. But then to go in and then just see how people's lives were just in every possible way turned upside down all at once. I think that quite often, in life, we get this one thing that's kind of our cross to bear in that moment, right? But it's rare that everything is happening all at once, and especially when you're talking about death and loss of all of that. There are a lot of times that I can't explain, and ours, I think, is not to really understand in some ways God's plan. It's beyond our understanding. So when I'm thinking about, in particular that woman, in Haiti who's lost it all, and I cannot explain that, right? I can only talk about what God has done in my life and who He is in my life and my family, and as I'm teaching my son about who God is, it's just like personal, and so I can only see and I mean I can see God's hand in other people's lives for sure, but when really truly catastrophic things happen, I don't know how to explain that, but I have to believe that God has a plan. Leading up to moderating the presidential debate, I was feeling nervous, like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be on this world stage and asking the questions of the politicians, and just knowing that there was a lot at stake. And so just feeling a lot of anxiety about that. And I've had Jesus Calling on my nightstand for several years, and have read it, but I will say again, I was making sure now, like during this time, I was looking for some word, I was looking for that confidence, and was regularly every day making sure I did not miss it. I was like starting out my day, with whatever the devotional was for that day. And so when I was then going to Houston to do the debate, I had taken pictures of the days that I would be away, so that I wouldn't actually have to bring the book. And now, if I'm thinking about it, I should have just downloaded the app, right? What was I thinking? But a little old school in that way. And so, but my husband didn't realize I had taken those pictures. And so each day that I was in Houston, he would take a picture and then forward it to me, which I never told him that I already had the pictures and I'd already read, because there was no way that I was going to go there without, kind of being prepared and reading from Jesus Calling every day.
We'll be right back with the wrap-up to our interview with Linsey Davis after this brief message about a beautiful new edition of Jesus Calling.
Share His love. Share His inspiration. Share His strength. Share His joy. Share the peace found in His presence. Jesus Calling.
Along with enjoying a successful career in journalism, Linsey is committed to spread a message of love and acceptance, laying a foundation for the upcoming generation. She talks about the 2 children's books she has written and how her parents inspired her by the way they lived their own lives.
I mean, for both books, I have to say that these were messages that my mom was trying to impart for me, and I have an older sister. And so, the first book, the idea, it's like a celebration of everyday blessings. And so being thankful and being, and that honoring God, I mean, that definitely was for both of my parents. Maybe even more so directly as far as being spoken from my mom. But, really paying attention to the small things and God's hand and fingerprint all over that. And in the second book, for sure, I mean, again, I think it was the same thing that I'm trying to do with my son. I don't know if back when I was growing up, like kind of in the 80s, I don't think that the climate was quite the same as what it is now. I mean, it's not like racism is new by any stretch, but I think the rhetoric has gotten kind of heightened. And so it's different. So maybe, racism then was a little more subtle than it can be at times today. So I don't know that she had to be as deliberate. I don't know that it was something that she had to make sure that she was telling us, because again, I think that she believes, like I do, that innately children just love. They're not thinking about all the different, divisions that we are quite often, many times as adults. There's just been more deliberate discussion about race lately that the children listen to and ask about. And so I think that I would be doing my son a disservice. I think we would be doing the children of his generation a disservice by trying to say, you're not old enough yet to talk about this, or we don't need to talk about this, or whatever, and like, try and sweep it under a rug. I think that we really need to meet it head on and talk about, yes, there are people who think this or whatever, but guess what? We love them. I mean, that's what is it? Second, what was it? So the first commandment, right, is to love God with all your heart and soul. And the second is likened to it, right? To love your neighbor as yourself. For the second book, for One Big Heart, a celebration of being more alike than different, I felt like with the current climate that our country and world really is in right now, I wanted to reinforce, and I think that that's important because it's not like a new lesson for children. I think that children really already get that they're not first focusing on our differences. My son's 5, and when he comes home and he's met a new friend, he doesn't tell me about their race or their background or religion or culture. He just says what they have in common. They both like Legos or drawing pictures or whatever it is. And so I wanted to reinforce that notion for him and other children and parents who I think find that same value important to put in place for their children. People will often say that, oh, children don't see color, and I totally disagree with that. I think that they do see color, they just don't assign a value to it. Quite often it's adults who do that. And I think that when you look at the hate crimes that are rising in the last 3 years, they've ticked up year over year. And I think that a lot of that is a fear of the unknown. And when people have not been exposed to people who look different, for people who have different beliefs, who act differently perhaps, that there becomes this like we versus they, this us versus them attitude. And I think that becomes so divisive, especially then when people are playing and preying upon dividing and making our differences the first thing that you notice. What I believe it's really imperative for parents is to expose their children to kids who are different, right? And so maybe you live in an area that's not very diverse, so they're not seeing that diversity in school or church or synagogue or on the playground. I think then you have to kind of look at what other tools do you have. Their dolls, their toys, their books. And those are ways that I think that it's very easy for children to just be exposed and experience people who may look different from them, right? Because I mean, the premise of One Big Heart is let's deal with it, let's talk about it. The people call it the elephant in the room, right? But again, because I believe that children do notice difference, let's say, yes, hey, we have different color skin and hair and features and likes and dislikes, but guess what? God gave us all this one unique gift. He gave us all one big heart, and that's the most important part because that's where love starts.
You can find Linsey's book, One Big Heart, at your favorite bookseller today. Next time on Jesus Calling Stories of Faith, we visit with pastor, speaker, and leadership advisor John Maxwell, who shares about how he's learned far more from his failures than from his successes.
I've learned a lot more from my failures than I have from my successes. When I'm succeeding, it's kind of like, let's just celebrate and aren't we wonderful? But when I'm failing, I'm saying, okay, there's something's wrong here. I've got to figure this out. And so what I really teach people all the time is to fail forward. That as you fall, just go 3 feet, fall forward and get back up, and you've already gained 3. And all my life, I've done a lot of failing forward.
Thank you for watching Jesus Calling Stories of Faith. To learn more about how to keep up with our shows bi-monthly and to listen to our weekly podcast, please visit youtube.com/JesusCallingBook to view and hear previous episodes, and to watch a short informational video about how to access all things Jesus Calling on audio and video formats. Plus, learn how to subscribe to our podcast and video channels. Your subscription helps get the word out to more people who will benefit from these inspirational stories of faith.